I brought a Catholic in England, and one who was executed because he said the Queen Elizabeth I was not head of the church. We lost land, we lost money. We weren't even allowed in education until 1829, when we had the Catholic Emancipation Act. We couldn't go to universities. We've suffered. Not as much as the Jews have suffered, but we've had our own share of suffering. But I've stayed true to this concept of God, and true also to the tradition in which my family suffered. But I'm not satisfied. I'm Mr. Singer. I mean, I must go on, and yet, as a Catholic, I was taught to be frightened of God. We didn't have the privilege that you had of being able to argue with God, as Job does. And so it's only as I get older that I'm prepared to be bold and ask this question, why? Because no answer comes. But I still go on asking the question.
May I ask you where you were born and what city?
I was born in Manchester, in Manchester. The north of England.
Oh, really?
That explains my Lancashire accent. But up in the northwest, we resisted the Reformation, you know, with the Henry VIII, which took hold in the southern counties and in the Midland counties. But in the north, we were always fighting against this, and we maintained the faith. And, of course, Irish blood got into the family to help the faith. Yet we've always had to struggle, not only in terms of our spiritual lives, but also in terms of our economic lives. Because Catholics, they lost everything. They lost their land. They lost their jobs. They couldn't enter the professions because you had to have a university degree to become a doctor or a lawyer. And we weren't allowed to go to universities. So my family was always very poor, and any talent we had could only express itself in the simplest forms, like the stage. My mother was a dancer, my father played the piano in cinemas, and this is a typical Catholic position in England. The great doctors, the great prime ministers, they all come from the south, and they're all Protestants, or as with Disraeli, they're Jews. We never had a Catholic prime minister. Had a Jewish prime minister, Disraeli.
Oh, yes, you had.
But we've always had this problem. It still goes on.
And he created an empire.
Indeed, he did.
Yes.
Empire. He had the vision. He had this vision.
He's known here. His father, even Isaac.
That's right, Isaac Disraeli. Yes.
Isaac Disraeli.
So there are similar backgrounds in a way. I mean.
Yes, well, Mr. Singer very astutely asked the background. The background is necessary. You have to know the background.
Yeah. Of course. Without the background, there is no right. I mean, there's no human being. We all have a background and roots, whether we like it or not. I was wondering, did they persecute your family?
Yes, we were persecuted. I say I had at least one ancestor who was executed. He was burned, actually, because he said the Queen was not head of the church. He said the Pope is head of the church.
So
that was it. See. And later we had a certain amount of land in the north, and then this was taken away because we were not Protestant. And if you wanted to enter politics, you had to undergo the Test Act, which meant you had to be willing to accept the Eucharist under the Anglican form. You had to take the bread and wine in the Anglican Church and say, this is not the body and blood of Christ. This is merely a symbol. And if you wouldn't do that, you were automatically a criminal. This went on for a long time, until 1829, which is not long ago.
But not in your time.
Not in my time, but in my great-grandfather's time.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning something.
Good.
À la demande de la journaliste, Singer dit quelques mots sur son travail d'écrivain. Il signale qu'il tient depuis 50 ans une chronique de faits divers dans un quotidien de langue yiddish aux États-Unis et qu'il écrit des histoires. Si le journal veut les publier, il les publie dans l'édition du samedi. Certaines, à la longue, finissent par constituer des romans. Il sait que Burgess est musicien. Mais la journaliste lui apprend qu'il est également l'auteur d'adaptations de textes classiques pour la télévision. Information que Burgess commente ainsi. Écrire des romans est difficile, et c'est assez mal payé.
We all know, Mr. Singer, that you write for... Recently there was an interview with you in a Swedish newspaper, a very good one, and the final question was about your your character. The interviewer asked you what is the main signs of your character or something, and your answer was compassion and rebellion. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember saying so.
Could you explain us a bit more about this answer?
I mean, I have compassion with people and also animals since I am a vegetarian. And from my childhood, I suffered from this kind of compassion. I saw chickens slaughtered, animals, and so on and so on. And rebellion is, I say to the Almighty, why did you create so much miserable? And I would say that these things always bother me from my childhood. And I think they bother everybody. I'm not a real exception in this respect.
God is not good.
It seems so from our point of view. It seems to be sometimes good or sometimes terrible.
He contains the devil. He contains the devil.
I'm afraid so. This is how it looks. Although it's hard for me to believe that the creator of all the words should have sometimes the cruelty of a devil. But from our point of view, it looks so. So we rebel against it. We say, since you have so much information, you are so great and so creative, why don't you have a little compassion, at least as little as I have? But he has his own ways.
That is the answer. That is
It's the only answer.
That is the answer.
Of course.
No.
That is what this book is about.
Yes.
Although it's written by a Christian, it is a book about about the Jewish God.
May I, before we go ahead, may I ask you, Mr. Burgess, what's your dominant mark in your character?
Well, I would be happy to have Mr. Singer's two qualities. Compassion and rebellion. I think he's absolutely right.
I think it's in him too.
I think we must have it if we're writers. If we take on the terrible burden of creating characters like God himself and building up a world in words, I think we have to have this terrible compassion for people and for animals, for living things, and at the same time feel terribly angry. And I think this anger is a characteristic of the big writers like Charles Dickens, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, this terrible anger that things are not better. It's the anger of Job, in a sense. It's in the book of Job. These questions you put to God, why? You get no answer. All that God says is, could you make Leviathan?
Yes.
Could you do this? Well, that's not the answer. No, I couldn't, but that's not the answer I want.
Yeah.
The answer I want is, why are things so wretched? Why are things so horrible? No answer comes. The Christians try to provide an answer, but I don't think it's a very in old age, I discovered it's not really a very successful one. Things are not explained. We still do not know why there's so much misery, so much torture, violence, tyranny. I suppose we're right to try and find an answer, but with no success.
Burgess poursuit. Le christianisme est une technique qui permet d'atteindre la compassion. La bonté ne vient pas du cœur, mais du cerveau. Tendre l'autre joue à celui qui vous a frappé est une méthode pour apprendre la tolérance. Sans cette méthode, l'homme ne fait pas spontanément le bien. Jésus est un rebelle qui est venu apporter ces techniques au monde, un rebelle juif. Hitler a bien tenté de faire du Christ un arien, fils d'un centurion romain, mais il faut se rendre à l'évidence. Le Christ est juif, même si cela n'a pas été compris.
You are writers and you are both fighting with the mites and so on, and I guess Mr. Burgess is a more blasphemer sort, or
Really?
would you agree?
I didn't know that. Blasphemous, I didn't know.
No?
What did you say he was?
Maybe I don't pronounce it.
You know, you pronounce it perfectly, but I just wondering that I'm a blasphemer. Oh, I didn't know that.
I said he was a blasphemer, maybe.
It doesn't look to me like a blasphemer, but who knows how blasphemers look like?
Who knows who blasphemes? Yes, I don't know. This is a good question, but what do you mean by blasphemy? I don't know.
Let me start by, you told us once about Mr. Stravinsky. Mr. Burgess was in a film recently on the Swedish television. And Stravinsky, you said something like, he created a substitute of religion, namely a very severe, austere concept of art.
Yes, that's true.
So can
Well,
one create a substitute of religion in that way?
Well, I think what I was saying in that program was, you see, we were talking about two great artists who were both born in 1882. So I think that we must have done this program in 1982. They were Stravinsky and James Joyce. And I think I said that Joyce was brought up a Catholic, as I was, but left it behind and had to create a substitute for the church he no longer believed in, and this was art. Art, with Joyce, is a kind of religion without God, in which there are very strict rules and a great aesthetic ideal, but God is not there anymore. He feels the absence of God, so he has to fill it in with a concept of art, which is almost religious. I think Stravinsky was pretty close there, but Stravinsky believed in God all his life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Joyce did not. Joyce was not sure.
Can one do a substitute? Can one recreate a substitute of religion?
I would say that worldly men try very hard to make worldliness into a religion, because they speak with such enthusiasm about artists, about other people. To my parents, this looked like idolatry. And in a way, it looks to me like this too. I don't think that art really, no matter how great it is, can take the place of religion. It cannot.
Is it a question of, mankind must be helped to find the reasons for morality, for moral, for instance? Is that why?
I would say that the philosophers never really succeeded in finding a real basis for religion, not for religion, for ethics, for morality. Spinoza tried, they all tried. Spinoza said we have to be moral. If I am going to be good to you, you will be good to me. It's kind of a pragmatic or a practical way of looking at morality. My morality, if I have any, is based on rebellion. I say to God, you have all the information, all the knowledge, all the power. I have nothing. But since I am a sufferer, and so are many of my other people, I don't want to go in your ways and be cruel in addition to the other shortcomings which I have. I don't think you can really base morality on rebellion, but it's as good a basis as any other, because the others are as flimsy as this one is.
Mm-hmm. That's very clear. That's very clear.
I'm really glad to talk to both of you.
That's very sound. That's very clear.
Are you comfortable, Mr.
Yes,
Singer?
I'm comfortable.
You are. Good.
Do you want me to go away while you talk to Mr. Singer?
No.
Stay right here.
Well, if you don't mind, no. I'd rather. But
why should you?
Well, I thought perhaps you'd prefer to a tête-à-tête.
No, I would tell you I like to hear what you have to say.
I'm very glad. Thank you. That's very kind. Good. Well, we stay together.
Oh, let's stay together.
Very good.
Singer raconte alors une histoire tirée du Talmud. Dieu, avant d'accorder le libre arbitre aux hommes, a convoqué les anges pour leur demander leur avis sur ce point. Tous lui disent de ne pas faire cette erreur. Devant une telle unanimité, Dieu décide de passer outre et accorde aux hommes le libre arbitre, c'est-à-dire la possibilité de faire librement le mal. Burgess enchaîne en disant que c'est là une question difficile. Un ami à lui a trouvé un jour une sorte de réponse. Dieu nous aime tant qu'il refuse d'intervenir. Burgess dit qu'il ne sait pas trop quoi penser de cette réponse.
Of course, we have another problem, Mr. Singer. I don't know how far this comes into Jewish thinking. The Christians, or the Catholic Christians, certainly have always been very interested in original sin.
Yes.
They say that St. Augustine taught, when man is born in sin, because Adam committed the first sin of disobedience, this sin is passed on, and we're all born in a state of sin. And Pelagius, our British heretic, said this is not true. Man is neutral. Man can choose good or evil. He is not predisposed to choose evil. And I feel that in politics, you know, the socialism and communism are based on this idea that we're totally free to choose. And we're not predisposed to be bad. I think this is a political, it's become a political issue. The socialists say we're totally good. Anything bad in man is caused by his environment. There's no predisposition to be evil. Well, I believe there is. I believe there is.
Big lie.
I believe there is a predisposition. I think the history of this century shows that we have a strong predisposition. There's a built-in capacity to do wrong. I wrote a book 25 years ago called A Clockwork Orange, which they made into a film. Stanley Kubrick made a film out of it. The film was fairly popular, but it was not well understood. The book was about a boy, Voyou, the French call him a young scoundrel, who goes around robbing, killing, and raping, ravaging, and the state catches him and takes him and says, right, we're going to remake you. We're going to use Pavlovian conditioning techniques so that you will respond to evil by feeling ill. So you will automatically desist from thinking bad thoughts. Well, you know you're going to start vomiting. And the idea of the book was to show this was far more wrong than to do what this boy was doing, that what they were doing was taking away from him the capacity of free choice. This was not well understood when the film was made, but people said, you are on the side of violence. When the film was shown, I got telephone calls saying there was a nun who was attacked by 4 boys. I was like, this is your fault. I said, well, it's not my fault. I'm merely showing what happens, what life is like. And I'm merely saying that it's probably better to commit a bad thing, a bad act, than to be so conditioned by scientific techniques that you cannot do anything unless the state wants you to do it. This was not well understood, but I still believe it. I still believe that it's probably.
How about the state? Does it?
The state tends to be. The state
did they succeed in?
Well, the book had 2 forms. In America, the book was published without the final chapter, because the American publisher said, we are very tough here. We can take far more than you British can. So the book ends with this young man being deconditioned so that he becomes capable of performing these acts again.
I see.
But in my version, the British version, he grows up. He grows up. He realizes that violence is an aspect of youth. Now he has energy, but he's able to use it for creation. He's going to be a great musician. The Americans didn't want that. So we only had that in Europe.
It's a terrible film. I couldn't.
You saw the film? Yes. You thought it was a bad film, or thought it was the...
No, I just couldn't take it to me. I couldn't see it. I just.
Well, I didn't like it too much. When I went to see it in New York, they wouldn't let me in. They said, this is not a film for old men. This is a film for young men. I said, well, I wrote the thing. Oh, never mind. All right, we'll let you in. But I was very worried at the time because people were not understanding. The film looked like a glorification of violence. I didn't mean that. I meant that violence is built into our nature. We can't neglect it. We can't pretend it's not there.
According to the Jewish point of view, Satan and God don't fight with each other. They're not really equal enough that they should fight. Satan knows that God is stronger than he, that God has created Satan so that he should help him test men, man's strength.
That is the book of Job, isn't it? I think, yes. Mm.
Again, it's always the same problem of free will and
predestination.
Determination. Yeah.
Well, you see, you can build a whole civilization on one or the other. I think the Swiss nation has built its civilization on the idea that...
Really?
Well, I feel that money automatically breeds. You can't stop it happening. It's predestined to breed. Therefore, you have banks. The human soul is like a watch. It's like a mechanism which you can foresee. Therefore, you make watches. And strikes me that the whole Swiss psyche is built on this Calvinistic notion.
I just come back from Switzerland.
Yeah,
if I would have known this, I would tell it to them.
Well, I think
you would tell it to them.
Well, I do occasionally. They will not. They have no sense of humour, so they will not accept it.
I'm married to a Swiss.
You're married. Well, this is well. I don't. Your Swiss is different.
Tell me, does he have a sense of humor?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Great.
So you see that I always accept.
That's why he's not living in Switzerland.
Burgess demande à Singer ce qu'il a pensé du film Yentl, que Barbara Streisand a tiré d'une de ses nouvelles. Le film n'a pas trop plu à Singer. Le reproche principal qu'il fait à Barbara Streisand, c'est d'avoir voulu tout faire elle-même. Écrire l'adaptation, mettre en scène, chanter, produire. Mais c'est peut-être le lot de tous les écrivains, d'être insatisfaits des adaptations qu'on fait de leurs romans au cinéma. Il ajoute que si Tolstoï avait pu voir Greta Garbo jouer Anna Karénine, il serait probablement devenu fou.
But what about the storytelling in the future? Is it important?
I'm sure that if literature is going to last, it will have to go back to storytelling or be storytelling. I would say no story, no novel, no short story. And why do away with storytelling? We all like to hear stories, and people come together and they gossip. They always tell stories. It's the best kind of entertainment. To take away from literature the storytelling is a sheer nonsense. This is how I feel about it. The very fact that one has to talk about it and try to convince people that literature and storytelling go together looks to me already like a paradox.
Yes, I agree. Well, I was thinking of two big novels, perhaps the two most influential novels of the century. One is Proust's big novel, À la recherche du temps perdu, which is a couple of thousand pages. And there was James Joyce's Ulysses, and people said, at last we are liberated in the novel from the duty of telling a story. But of course, if you look very carefully at those two books, you'll find that they're just as orthodox in their storytelling techniques, although they take longer about it. They move. I mean, Joyce's Ulysses is just set on a single day in Dublin. Nothing really happens. But everything is happening. There's a man, Mr. Bloom, there's a young poet, Stephen, and they are going to meet. And they're moving towards this all the time through the 700 pages, and finally nothing happens. But there is a conclusion. They've met. They've made contact. People say, here we have liberation from the necessity of having a plot. But there's a plot there as much as anything. I think in Proust also. I think there's a plot.
As about Proust?
I think in Proust. I think Proust.
There is a story.
There's a story.
There is.
It's a very complicated story.
You have to look for it.
You have to look. It's there, though. It's there.
Yeah.
Now, may I ask you, Mr. Singer, as we have subjects, I told you, themes for our programs, and ecstasy is one of those themes. I would ask you, ecstasy, is it good to be carried away in ecstasy, or is it bad? Is it a religious feeling behind, or what is it?
According to Spinoza, all emotions are bad. He considers emotions bad only when you adequate ideas, when you study mathematics or logic and so on. I think that without emotions, a human being would be a vegetable, no matter how educated he would be. As far as literature is concerned, it is the law of emotions. Most emotions play the biggest part in literature. As far as the moralists, I would say that they considered our emotions very often a disturbance. Let's say if someone insults you and you feel like killing him, they wouldn't say that this is a good kind of emotions. Why should you have such a bad emotion of trying to kill somebody or to imagine that you kill him? As far as literature is concerned, without emotions, it disappears. Like without storytelling, without emotions, and without ecstasy, it would disappear altogether.
De l'extase, la discussion va glisser sur le sexe. Burgess dit que la plupart des cultures sont effrayées par le sexe. Parce que la sexualité, comme l'extase, nous met hors de nous, donc hors du contrôle de l'État. Enchaînant, la journaliste demande ce qu'il en est de l'humour. Burgess dit que le Christ avait le sens de l'humour et que l'Ancien Testament est rempli de jeux de mots. Il ajoute que l'anglais est une langue comique et qu'il est très difficile d'écrire des choses sérieuses en anglais. La discussion s'arrête là sur ce thème. En guise de conclusion, la journaliste revient sur l'Apocalypse et la résurrection. Singer dit que les Juifs croient à la résurrection, mais que ça n'est jamais encore arrivé. Pour ce qui est de l'Apocalypse, Singer ne croit pas à l'idée chrétienne de fin subite du monde. Pour lui, le pire est déjà là.
Actually, the Almighty tried to end the world in the flood.
Yes.
And if he did not succeed, I don't think that the atomic scientists will manage to do it.
Yes, I mean, yes. I don't know whether this is hopeful or hopeless, but I think mankind is going to go on for a long, long time.
I call it hopeless.
Whereas it may be hopeless. We've plenty of backsliding in front of us yet. Plenty of sin, plenty of that. Plenty to look forward to. New sins, new ecstasies, new apocalypses.
I would say there is great similarity between all religions, whether they're Christian and Buddhist and so on. So it's a way of thinking of the human brain, but it's more or less the same. Don't give in to the body too much. Do your duty, do what God has told you, and so on and so on. It never worked, really, and it still doesn't.
So, could one learn to think in a Jewish way as a Protestant? Or
Yes, you have to, I think. We have to.
we have to.
I think we have to. It's one of my deep regrets that I never had the opportunity to embrace that faith which contains Christianity. I think it's a bigger faith. This is a terrible thing to say in a Lutheran country, but I always think the original Judaic philosophy is far bigger than anything we produce, chiefly because of this tendency to divide, always dividing the God versus the devil, the body versus the soul. And I always felt in the Jewish religion, as far as I know it, there was a tendency to see life as a totality, which the Christians have never been willing to do. It's a terrible thing to say in a Christian country, but I think it's true.
The Christians gave to the devil more of a...
They gave more. They gave more importance to.
Gave him a larger
devil.
role, so to say.
So we have to learn to think in a Jewish way.
I don't think it's a bad idea.
If you have nothing else to do, try this.
Okay, let's end.
Tack.
Varsågod.
It was a pleasure.
That's
It was a special pleasure to listen to
Great
this
pleasure for me.
gentleman.
Great pleasure. I didn't know we were being recorded. We were being recorded all the time. All the
Yeah,
time.
no, I didn't know it.
I didn't know.
I know.
That's good. That's good television.